privilege to welcome you all here for our law firm's first webinar on the published article COVID-19, a temporary setback or death for mid-sized Indian businesses, which has been authored by our law firm itself. Before we start, I'd like to place some ground rules for all the participants. Please keep all your devices on mute and disable your video at all times for everyone's better experience. This webinar will be streaming live on our Facebook page. Please post all your questions along with your name as comments on our Facebook page or in the chat box of our Zoom meeting room. We want to make sure that everyone knows that due to the paucity of time, we'll be taking up a limited number of questions only in the last 15 minutes of our webinar, particularly those which are related to our article and the discussion thereon. So make sure that your questions are relevant and posted well within the first 40 to 45 minutes. A little disclaimer. Alliance Law Group acknowledges diverse views around the world and does not advocate for or against any position. The views expressed in this webinar are solely of the resources presenting them, and Alliance Law Group does not endorse or oppose the perspective. To give a little background, I'd first like to tell you about who we are. Alliance Law Group is a law firm which was founded in the year 2012 and is based out of New Delhi, led by 3 distinguished partners. We are a litigating firm with a thriving practice in an all-round field, including but not limited to criminal, civil, and commercial litigation. I think our article, and most importantly, this webinar, becomes all the more relevant and crucial in light of the recent announcements made by the Honorable Prime Minister and the Finance Minister over the past few days. In fact, some of our suggestions in our article have actually been incorporated and implemented by the Government of India. I must take a moment to mention that the idea for this article and this webinar has been driven by our founding partner, Mr. Yash Mishra, who will be sharing a few minutes to throw light on some legal practical aspects of our topic today in the latter half of the webinar. Coming to the goals of our webinar today, we wish to understand the economic nuances that are associated with the current crisis, as well as chalking out different paths and trajectories to sail through this extraordinary situation. We aim to deliver relevant content and offer a helping hand to companies, enterprises, firms, and all other organizations to not only understand what reliefs exist for them, but how to effectively avail those reliefs. With that said, I'd now like to introduce you to our guest key speaker and famous economist, Mr. Badri Narayan Gopalkrishnan, who is joining us from the United States today. Dr. Gopalkrishnan is an applied economist, business consultant, and data scientist associated with top universities like Harvard, Purdue, and leading firms like McKinsey, KPMG, and PwC. He has worked with various bodies of the United Nations over the past few years, and at present, he has assumed the role of a consultant at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development on the topic, the economics of pandemics and fiscal sustainability. It is an honor to have you, sir. Without further ado, I now yield the floor to Dr. Gopalkrishnan.
Thank you, Manya, and thank you, Alliance Law Group, for inviting me. So today I'll be talking about the economic underpinnings of the ongoing crisis, and I'll talk in very simple terms and not like high-end economic theory. And then I will talk about certain parts of this article which are relevant to the recent steps taken by the government. Just today, we released a report with the Asian Development Bank, which assesses the global economic impact of COVID to be in the range of 5.8 to 8.8 trillion US dollars, which is roughly about 5 to 10% of the global GDP. And for India, the impact is on similar lines. Around the minimum impact is expected to be around 5% of reduction in GDP, and a maximum could be around 10%. So it's a huge negative shock, and the way and the different channels in which this is happening is coming from both the supply side and the demand side. In many of the other crises before, usually we have some uh, problems in terms of investment or supply side disruptions, and or we have problems in the demand side. However, in this particular crisis, it all started with the Chinese market, Chinese getting affected by the disease, and that resulting in the disruption in the supply chain there, and that actually affected the global production and supply chain. And India was no exception. We rely a lot on China for many of our inputs. So the initial impact was from that side, the supply side disruptions. And then gradually what happened was, when the pandemic entered all the countries including India, the demand side effect also started, because the shutdown was announced, and the economic activity got stagnated, and people started staying home and not going out and consuming things like they were before. So because of that, the demand fell. So supply fell and the demand fell, and then because of demand, supply fell more. So there was a continuous reinforcement of supply and demand, falling down. And this is sort of unprecedented in the past 6-7 decades. Maybe one can go back to the time of Great Depression, when this kind of situation happened. In terms of this is the broad idea, and in terms of the industries, particular industries that have been largely affected, uh, frankly speaking, almost no industry has been left out. Every industry has been affected. Large, medium, small scale, micro, all kinds of industries are affected. But particularly the sectors that have been largely hit are travel, transportation, tourism, hotels and restaurants, and any activity that requires gathering, social recreation, in any industry that relies on meetings and so on. So these are the industries that have been extremely affected. By extremely, I mean they've been affected like more than 10-20% reduction, maybe even more, depending on the industry. And one would expect that the healthcare industry is getting a boom, but unfortunately, that is also not true. The reason being that, first of all, most of the additional demand has been on testing, diagnosis, and treatment for COVID, and not for other diseases. And people who are suffering from many other diseases are very cautious, too cautious to enter the hospital premises. So the hospitals are all also facing, healthcare industry is facing difficulties in that direction. Basically, complete focus is on coronavirus, so other things are affected. And when it comes to micro, small, and medium enterprises, the main issue here is that the reason why we focus on this sector for this webinar, and the article that Alliance Law Group has written, is that there are two aspects here. The first aspect is that for a country like India, micro, small, and medium enterprises are like the backbone of the economy, and most of the employment comes from this sector. And if something goes wrong to the sector, the whole economy is affected. That is the first angle. The second thing is that in most of the crises in the past, including the global financial crisis we had in 2007-8, India was largely unaffected by many of the global crises. The reason being that the MSMEs we have, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, are relatively resilient, and they come back during this crisis, and they act as a buffer, and they kind of cushion when these shocks happen. So basically, in this context also, because of the very fact that they are so important for the economy, and on top of it, they have acted as saviors during crisis. It is very, very important for the government and also for people at large and industries to pay more attention to MSMEs. Because even if you think about the large industries, if you, for example, take automotive industry, the tier one is all large scale industries. Then you have tier two, tier three, and then if you keep going going backward in the supply chain, you will see that there are many MSMEs that are running the show from behind. And so anything goes wrong with them is going to affect the whole economy. And also employment, if employment is affected, then income is going to be affected automatically. And if income is affected, demand is going to be affected. And if demand is affected, then again the whole supply will be in excess, and again the supply has to be cut down, and it's going to be spiraling like anything. So something has to be done to stop this spiraling. And we have to the government has to work on boosting the demand and also boosting the supply. And this is the context in which the Alliance Law Group has written this article. I have gone through the article, and many of the points that they have raised, I've covered many of these points in my discussion so far. But after explaining what is happening, they come up with about 9 points on what are the remedies. How can the government, what kind of steps the government can take to get out of this crisis? And I'm also very heartened to see that many of these have been implemented or announced by the government. The Honorable Prime Minister announced a very high level vision of what is happening, how are we working on this problem, and the amount of stimulus. And we also had another article that we had written along similar lines, how to come out of this recession. What kind of how can the government take care of the MSMEs and the people at large and so on. So let me focus on some of the packages, some of the ideas that Alliance Law Group has mentioned here, and how that is taken care of by the announcement by the Honorable Finance Minister yesterday and today. Basically yesterday and day before yesterday. So the first measure is, I'm not going through all the measures, but I'm going through the measures that were actually announced, the measures that were suggested in Alliance Law Group article, and among them, which ones have been positively addressed by the government. So among them, the first thing I see is a credit guarantee. The government has announced that the MSMEs credit will be given guarantee by the government, which is a good thing, because that can help them sail through the crisis by getting some loans for the physical working capital, and paying the wages and so on. And that is one point they also raise. Alliance Law Group also raises about paying the wages and so on. If they don't have enough money, how can they pay? And for that, this credit guarantee scheme may help. And it is also not that expensive for the government, because most of the MSMEs, there has been a lot of research on this. A lot of MSMEs, particularly the micro and small businesses, they are usually, the defaulting rates are very low. So this guarantee scheme does not actually translate into huge numbers that the government has to spend. So the credit guarantee scheme may probably correspond to a small percentage of default that happens in the MSME, which is taken up by the government, which is covered by the government. So it is actually a very smart move to announce this credit guarantee scheme. And this can be a scheme that is low cost for the government and can mean a lot for the MSMEs. Another thing is I think the most important part of the announcement is, I would say, the relief for the distressed MSMEs, and that is basically also going to help the MSMEs to stay afloat, not get dissolved, not go away. At least for a few months, they can get relief on various things. So I think that is a positive measure. And another thing that I noticed both in the Alliance Law Group points and the Finance Minister's speech was press conference was the relief for the discoms and power distribution companies and power generating companies, because electricity is ultimately the most important factor for production, for consumption, for everyone. And if they are under stress, then everyone is going to suffer. So and particularly MSMEs, because they are dependent so much on them. And so basically the reduction in the stress for the discoms and the generation companies, that is another welcome move. And there are a few things that are relatively long term measures, which may not have immediate impact, but may be visible in the longer term. And one example is the reclassification of MSMEs. They've redefined what do we mean by MSMEs. Basically, they've increased the limit of investment and turnover to be classified as an MSME, which means that there are many more industries that are going to be benefited. They're going to derive the benefits of MSMEs. This is another positive step for maybe to some extent even immediately positive step for many companies that are slightly above the older definition of MSMEs. They may be wondering that they are, despite being under stress, they are not being able to avail the benefits of an MSME, and now they don't have to worry about that. Another important reclassification is the clubbing of manufacturing and services. Previously, they were not together, and now both of them are eligible for being MSMEs. Then the second press conference covered a lot of reliefs for people at large, things like minimum wages across the country, food supplies for the poor people and the immigrants, and even the people who do not have ration card, and the ration card being eligible for use in any part of a country, like one country, one ration card. So these are all very, very nice measures. And now I think I will also before concluding, I will also very quickly go through some of the points that have been mentioned in Alliance Law Group article, which have not yet been addressed by the government. And I think it is quite possible that more announcements may come and more refinements may come, because this is work in progress. Even for analyzing the impact, we have been working almost every hour. We have to keep updating the situation. For implementation, it is definitely going to be a lot of calibration, a lot of trials and errors and so on. So, but I'll go through very quickly, and then I'll hand over the rest to Manya again. So the first thing is the immediately releasing all refunds due from the government. I think that has been one of the things that is announced in one of the press conferences, but it still remains to be seen to what extent will it be done, because announcement is one thing and actual implementation is another. So we have to see. Bailout packages for bankrupted sectors is also kind of touched upon in the discussions. Temporary credit guarantees are there. Wage reimbursement guarantees is not completely, it's not explicitly covered, but when you think about the distressed companies relief, I think this may be part of that. Waivers from certain monetary liabilities for the business owners. Again, this is particularly for the distressed companies. These things will be taken care of. Others, we are not sure. And another thing is the accountability of PSUs, and that is definitely not explicitly addressed so far. So this is something that the government still has to work on. Then you have the discom, distribution companies, and generation power distribution, power generation companies. This has been sort of addressed by the government. Then you have the GST dues. That is a major issue. I've been discussing with industries past couple of years, and many MSMEs have been hit because of the two things. One is the lack of disbursement of GST dues. Second is the extremely stringent implementation of GST, which means that there are the penalty and the fines are really hefty, which is actually good in the long term, because once the economy adjusts, there has to be strong implementation. But I think in the short term, particularly the small and medium enterprises are suffering, because if they're not able to pay the tax for, let's say, they not pay 100 rupees, and they have to pay penalty of like 10 rupees a day or something. So it's a huge, I'm just giving random numbers, but basically that is a concept. If you're not able to pay some part of GST, then you have to pay hefty fine, which is actually good because you will be motivated to pay. But given the pace of implementation, since this is all done very very quickly, it is a major difficulty for the MSMEs. And dues, GST dues are even bigger issue, and that has to be tackled. And I think that is there is another point about the construction and beautification projects. Definitely that is something the government has to think about, and I think most likely they may suspend it for now and come back to it later. So I think I have covered most of the points I wanted to discuss. I will hand it over to Manya. Thank you.
Right. So thank you so much, Dr. Gopalkrishnan, for that exhaustive and informative breakdown of some of the pressing issues and hurdles which is faced by us, most of us actually, most during this pandemic. Uh, I'd now like to call upon our second speaker for the day, who is also our firm's founding partner, Mr. Yash Mishra, to share his thoughts and views on the prevailing situation and give us an insight into the practical legal aspects of this pandemic.
Thank you, Manya. First of all, I would like to thanks Dr. Badri to consider our article to be discussed, which is a proud feeling for us. And thank you, Dr. Badri, for that for that thing. And especially, I really want to thank to my team, which is Manya, who is pretty vocal, as you guys can hear it out, and Aditi, Bhavya, and Nidhi Jaswal, because without which we could not have made this article. And this article is also the result of COVID-19, because otherwise we were sitting idly in the house because the courts were shut. So special thanks to my team and to all the wonderful people around me. Now I think this whole article has been read by the government, because this timing of this conference or the writing of this article and the announcement made by Honorable Prime Minister, which actually goes strictly what actually we have suggested. Now the question would be how the legal interpretation would be. Now my suggestion, and in fact I can see a lot of professional and non-professional, so I'll speak in a very layman language so that everybody should understand that. Policies are good, they made the announcements. Now the implementation part is important. And as a lawyer, if I say, what are the amendments the government is going to bring it, the kind of language they're going to use it, the kind of words they're going to use it, so that the people understand it is actually implied. And it should not be against the objective of the act. That is the primary rule of law. Any amendment should not be against the primary object of the law. For example, nobody has even read it, what a disaster management act is. So suddenly once the pandemic comes, everybody goes to this disaster management act and trying to read it. Now we are trying to understand, okay, what that the government has the power can do under the pandemic situation. That is why this amendment, whatever the government is trying to think, or the ordinance, we have to be very careful on that to understand that. Second thing which I have noticed during this pandemic situation is everybody wants to know what is force majeure. Force majeure is something which is we have to be very careful again. Don't rush for it. And we understand as an Indian, or I don't know if they are US people also. There's a movie called Oh My God. So kind of force majeure understanding of that, the word of force majeure was started by actually him. Now, once the pandemic has come in, we all trying to understand, okay, what is force majeure? In fact, it has been now started by the Delhi High Court. There's an interim order passed by the Delhi High Court, which I'll share the details, where they have only touched upon. There is no legal interpretation as of now. They were previous. What will happen to the present situation? We still need to wait for that. That is only an interim order. That is what I'm trying to say. And second thing, everybody in the industry or the organization wants to use this force majeure clause. My suggestion would be force majeure, yeah, it's an act of God. We don't know whether it is an act of God or whatever. It is still has to come in the picture. Every case will depend on the facts and circumstances if you want to bring your case under force majeure. Second thing, any willful default in performing the obligation of the contract will not come into force majeure. This is what we have to understand under the force majeure. This is my knowledge. People are writing n number of things on force majeure. They are absolutely right. But yes, there should not be any willful default. This is the primary thing of the force majeure. Second thing, and in fact, the government has now, because on the basis of supply chain, there was the government office memorandum on 19th of Feb. Now, recently, there is 13th of May, if I'm not wrong. They have changed the concept. They are trying to uh, make people understand what exactly is force majeure. There was a strict definition, and they have modified it. Now, that is why we have to wait. What is force majeure? And every case, obviously, every case will be dealt accordingly on the facts and circumstances. Secondly, the Mumbai High Court has also dealt with no work, no wages concept, which is also again an interim order. Again, we have to be very careful of that. People don't want to pay, not want to pay. That is something else. To me, as a lawyer, if I feel as a team leader, if I say, what is important is the inter-organization dispute, which we have to be very careful. As a lawyer or as a leader, what I feel is the team building, because what you are is because of the team. Even the industry, even the organization, everybody wants to lay off, everybody wants to use the law, but no. Create a team, maintain a team, no matter how, and people will understand that. Even your employee will understand. So for me, if I give you the legal solution for that inter-organization dispute, the mediation. Try mediation process between the employee-employee dispute. Try to make them understand what you guys are going through, what you're not going through, and that is the best course as I feel. Don't just feel like, okay, I'll go to the court and will, and because the virtual courts are still, we are understanding, and Supreme Court is doing a wonderful job on that, but still we have to wait because we have a population of 130 crores, and the amount of litigation we're expecting is, everybody went to the court, it's very difficult to handle that, especially in virtual courts. So adopt the motion of this mediation process, try to sort out between the employee and the employer. That is my suggestion. Next thing I really want to touch is on the articles. In fact, I would like to end because there's nothing much to say on me, because Dr. Badri has taken us very beautifully what the economic factor would be. As legal, we have to understand what will the amendments. That is what right now we have to wait. And in the end, I'll would like to see what is the thought process of any organization to run their organization, whether they want to continue with the team or they don't want to continue with the team. That is the whole important thing which we have to understand. After this, I guess Manya, I guess my time is very limited, so I'll ask the question answers to be start.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful views. I mean, I know for a fact that we all rush towards theory and we rush towards understanding the interpretation of laws. But, I think the key takeaway from your speech would be to look into the practical side of things, to look into the fact that rather than going into the theoretical aspect of law, there's so much about mediation, there's so much about arbitration that we could still explore. And I think this is the time to make most use of our alternative dispute mechanisms rather than litigation. And I think you've done a wonderful job trying to push the case for mediation, I think. And as you rightly said, we have to wait for the proposed amendments in the laws to come to actually understand what the legal implications would be. So now we will be moving into the last session of our webinar, which is the question and answer session. As I mentioned in the beginning, we will only be able to take up limited questions and the most relevant questions. So in case we miss out on any questions, or if we are not able to address your questions, we request you all to email us your queries at mail@alliancelawgroup.in, and we will try to respond to you at the earliest. Now, taking up in a random order, I think most of the questions are for Badri sir. The first question that we have here is, uh, is there something that we can learn from the past, Badri sir, with special reference to, say, like you mentioned, the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, or even the global financial crisis that could help us come out of this? Is there any fiscal measure, or is there any monetary measure that could be repeated in a situation like this and help the MSME sector?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great question. Uh, Definitely, from all these three events and even the other kind of crisis that we have faced in the past, there is always something to learn. Uh, from the Spanish flu, the best thing to learn is about the importance of the healthcare solution, right? Until the healthcare solution was found, the Spanish flu really,
Right,
affected
right.
millions of people, and after that, and also even then the social, physical distancing was a problem, and that actually, people did not follow that, and that actually propagated that. So definitely, Spanish flu is a good example for the healthcare part of it. Great Depression is a good example for, I think, I will be able to simultaneously answer another question by answering this, because another question was about the stimulus for people and so on.
Right,
So
right.
Great Depression led to few different things in the U.S. One of the most important thing being the beginning of the New Deal, where the government put in a lot of money, a lot of spending for infrastructure and so on here, and gave also a lot of support to the poorer people and so on. And particularly during the depression itself, many governments were forced to make sure that the poor people get their food and so on. So all these things are very important lessons learned from Great Depression. Massive government stimulus, government intervention is definitely required. And from the global financial crisis, what we can learn is the first point that you have in the Alliance Law Group article, which is about the bailing out. So bailing out of companies was highly controversial when it happened, but actually, frankly speaking, that was the biggest positive measure that helped the US come back to normal economy, and in fact, economy was booming until recently. So I think definitely helping the firms, not only because the helping them is some people may interpret that as firms are capitalistic, so when they maximize profits, the government is only charging taxes but not share in the profits. So when they are facing losses, the government should stay away from them. That is the logic that people say, but that is very theoretical. It's not very practical. In practical terms, even if you're concerned about the people, about the masses, one has to take some effort to help the failing firms, large or small, both. because a lot of employment is at stake. If the firms fall, then a lot of people are going to lose jobs, and that is going to affect the economy. Well, now then the question is, how do you support them? How much money can the government spend? That I think some lesson you can learn from global financial crisis is that the government can take equity on some of them. So you don't just give them loans or even credit guarantees or just subsidies, free money, but you take ownership on some of them, and in return for the money that you're putting in. And of course, it's not nationalization, but it is more like getting invested in the companies that you are helping. That was a great strategy followed here in the US during the global financial crisis, and that was quite helpful. Government also earned dividends because of that later on when the economy came back to normal. So I think these are some things you can learn in very simple terms. The biggest lesson learned is massive government intervention in terms of both healthcare measures and in terms of fiscal stimulus, income transfers, and so on.
Right, right. So the next question we have is for Yash sir. So what change do you think that the government is trying to bring about by changing the MSME definition?
I guess the best answer for MSME would be that fear of losing benefits.
Yeah.
So that fear has to end. The government has actually bring out the made the announcement. I don't know the amendment in the act as of now. They have actually to remove that fear. They have increased the investment limit. They have increased the given the additional criteria for turnover. They have drawn a distinction between manufacturing and service sector, which is a good part in for the MSMEs under the as per the law. But again, as depend how the government will bring into this, it is against the object of the act. We still need to figure it out. But this is the quote is that fear of losing benefit is gone from the MSME as of today. That is my
Right,
answer.
right. So, Baji sir, the next question would be for you from Sana. Uh, it says, how do you see India with reference to FDI in light of the current scheme for MSMEs, especially keeping in mind the recent press note 3?
So the press note 3 is about the FDI for the
Right,
neighboring countries, right? The China, yeah. So I think in terms of the MSMEs, we already discussed that these different things, this credit guarantee and distressed MSMEs and all these things are going to be pretty favorable to MSMEs, at least to stay afloat, like was what Mr. Yash Mishra was saying. Uh, the question is about, it's about life or death kind of question. So that is what we are talking about. We are not talking about money to make these companies prosperous, but just to stay afloat. Uh, and this point about the press note 3, this FDI, I think it is in normal circumstances, it could have been highly debated, and it could have been highly controversial, and maybe even maybe China could have even gone to the WTO or other international organizations for litigating and so on. But in this current circumstances, I think it was a fairly justified move, and I think many other countries are also doing the same in different ways. They're doing their own strategy. Like Japan has uh, announced a package of few $billion to incentivize their Japanese firms that exist in China to come back to Japan. So likewise, many countries are doing that. So I think I don't see I don't see anything wrong in that press note, and I also think that it it has a potential to avoid further catastrophe. Maybe one possibility that could have happened is some of these kind of what you call as um, you know predatory investments, right? These are kind of predatory, and they could have potentially taken over some of the even MSMEs, and there is this concept called cannibalization of companies. So you basically take over a company in order to shut it down. So those kind of situations could have happened. This is what happened in the US with the public transportation in the 1940s. In order to promote the auto industry, the auto industry, auto companies actually took over a lot of public transport companies and then closed them just to shut them down so that there is greater demand for cars. So those kind of things could have happened, and I think it was high time that this press note was done. And it I think maybe before that was done, some damage has already been done, but at least better late than never. At least it was done on the right time. So yeah, that's my answer.
Right. So, Yash sir, we have another question for you. If somebody wants to actually invoke the force majeure clause, what steps do you think it involves? What are the practical documents required for this?
Ideally, as I said, ki don't rush for it. I don't know who's the query, who asked the question, but anyway, again, as depends on how you issue the notice of invocation of force majeure. That is the first and foremost important thing to raise the point of force majeure for any dispute. So that is the most important thing which you have to understand, and how you issue the notice of termination of contract, the language of it, which is very important, whether the facts and circumstances allows that to do that or not, depends. As I said, you should not be a willful defaulter of the obligation of the contract. Then probably you might use this force majeure. But as I said, these are three bit, and also the how you initiate the arbitration proceedings and all that thing, which is still very fluid. We don't know how as Delhi High Court has only made a passing reference, because the final order has to come. And
Right.
Honorable Supreme Court, I'm sure when the matter which is there, they'll give the finality to the what, how, when, and how you can invoke this force majeure clause. That is my answer to you.
Right. Okay, so Badri sir, we have another question from Shruti for you. Uh, Out of all the measures announced by the government on 13th May for the MSMEs, it seems like the majority of the MSMEs will not be able to avail the collateral free loans because there are certain caps on it. So what do you think is like the likely impact of this? Because I think a majority of about over 6 crore MSMEs would be left out from this bracket.
Yeah, I think that is rather unfortunate. I think um, these kind of adverse situations need adverse policies. So definitely, again, like I mentioned before, in normal circumstances, this is completely understandable. This is how it should be. But in this circumstance, when the MSMEs are going to have nothing, they're basically just trying to stay afloat. It's not fair to ask them for collateral. So I think I haven't I don't know exactly what they're going to do in terms of this credit guarantee part of the policy measure. If I don't know if they're going to extend it to say that collateral is not needed. So if potentially that could happen, maybe that could also something that can happen in the coming press conferences in future. But I would say that that is extremely important to have this facility of getting loans without collateral, and that will have a huge impact. If if that's not there, basically you are not reaching the majority enterprises that are suffering.
Right, right. Okay, so Yash sir, we have another question for you. How do you think mediation can be, used in times like these to kind of settle the employer-employee disputes, or say under the MSME? Because I think the first step in the MSME Act is the Samadhan, which calls for a mediation. So, how do you think that is going to help?
I guess the Mane, this question can be answered by you. It's the way we run the office. Every time we have a dispute, we go for the mediation because it is always between me and rest of the office where we try to draft a case or whatever. And you don't need a trained mediator, but you have a trained mediator. There are a lot of institutions. Delhi High Court has it. I guess every High Court has attached a mediation center to that effect. And ideally, it's between the how leader of any organization is trying to move forward with the team. It's how you make them understand what is your real problems are. If that is successful, then you don't need a trained mediators. But end of the day, yeah, there are institutions which you can directly apply, because Delhi High Court has a pre-lit mediation process, which is, I guess, very effective. And at least I can feel that the one of quite a few matters we have done with the pre-lit mediation, and that's been successful. So it's not every time my whole endeavor is that it's not necessary that you have to go every time to the court to get certain kind of relief. It is the leader or the head who can sort it out and just finish it off. That's my answer.
Right. So rather than being contentious, we should try and find the midpoint and a settlement. And I think you do that wonderfully for most of our cases.
I,
Okay.
I'll say to that, as of now, I guess I'm successful because I guess my team is up and ready to whatever I say.
We're always here for that view, sir. Badri sir, now we have another question from Asad. It says, prior to the commencement of the lockdown, our banking sector, particularly the public sector banks, was suffering from a rising number of banking frauds. Would it be correct to say that credit guarantee scheme can have a potential counterproductive effect, as our banking system might not be equipped to provide credit on such a large scale?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I also want to take this opportunity to answer another related question, because another question was also about whether, I think from same person, it was about whether the situation prior to the COVID was already bad, or was
Right.
it, does it have anything to do with the current problem? So I think that and this may be related. So first I'll answer this question. So here I think it's definitely kind of a indiscriminate credit guarantee scheme can have this bad effect that Asad is pointing out. But I think we still don't know the exact details how this credit guarantee scheme is going to work, or I don't know whether it has been completely articulated yet. So if this is only meant for MSMEs that are distressed, or like not distressed, maybe distress is probably a stronger term, but some they have some levels of losses going on and difficulties going on, and only MSMEs. If that is the case, then it wouldn't be that bad. First, because the MSMEs have been generally, the default rates are lower compared to the large corporations. The loans that you're giving to them are, relatively speaking, statistically speaking, they are safer. Secondly, when you're only targeting the ones that really need the credit support, then you're actually reducing the relative size of the the audience, the people who are getting this credit guarantee support. So in that sense, it may not be such a huge thing for the banking system. And thirdly, the RBI is also announcing all these liquidity measures. So the liquidity problem won't be there. The banks will have enough money. And of course, you can also talk about the inflationary effect, because when the liquidity injection happens, inflation is going to happen. But in today's situation, inflation is not that big an issue, because otherwise, because of demand slump, oil has gone to the negative territory. Oil prices have gone to negative, and many other prices are falling. So in that sense, the inflationary tendency of the liquidity injection is likely to just cancel the deflationary effect, and we may have similar levels of inflation, hopefully, particularly if the liquidity injection is not indefinite. Like in the US, they have announced indefinite QE, indefinite quantitative easing. we don't have that level of thing in India. So I think that's kind of comforting. And I think despite all this, I still think this has to be done extremely carefully. The implementation has to be extremely careful. In theory, in principle, whatever I'm saying makes sense, but implementation has to be careful. And it's actually the same. It's actually a problem of human beings. It's the same set of people, same set of problems. So the same thing led to NPAs and all the problems that happened before can such problems can recur again. uh, just the proper checks and balances have to be followed in that case, and where the credit guarantee applies has to be clearly defined.
So we
So I
have
think
to
that is.
essentially wait out for the policy to be formalized and presented, and that is when an actual interpretation can and a comparison can be made.
Can be
So
made,
we
yeah. But these are valid points, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I think we'll be taking up our last question from Sonakshi. So, what will be the impact of nullifying the differentiation created between the manufacturing sector and the service sector under the MSME Act? What objective do you think will be achieved?
So I think the main objective is that typically the MSME benefits have been availed by the manufacturing MSME manufacturing sector, and the services sector has some other set of benefits. But by putting them together, you're simplifying the benefit structure so that they're all treated alike. Secondly, there is some concept called servicification of manufacturers. This has been happening all over the world, and it will happen more and more in the future. So, what does it mean? Basically, whatever a lot of things that you are manufacturing are today services. One classic example is in the 1980s. If you want to listen to Michael Jackson album, then you have to buy a physical CD that has to be manufactured and you import it from the US. But today you can listen to it on YouTube. So this is a very classic example of how manufacturing becomes service. Like at the end of the day, it's a CD that is manufactured. Now it is service. So in this sense, I just gave a very simple example, but there are many complicated things. Like for example, in the US, as the US became more and more prosperous, the blue collar jobs shifted to countries like Mexico and China, and still the manufacturing companies stayed back in the US. But what did they do in the US? They only designed. They only indulged in the service part of the manufacturing companies. So basically, you for the namesake, you have a big auto industry in the US, but maybe 60-70% of it is just services. So it is a manufacturing sector, but it's basically services. So this fine line between manufacturing and services have been changing, and a lot of industrial definitions are also changing recently to take into account this kind of amalgamation between manufacturing and services. So in that sense, it's also a technical correction. I don't know whether apart from the previous point that I mentioned, where to make the benefits and incentives uniform for manufacturing and services, keep them on level playing field. This second point I'm mentioning is more of a technical point, which is probably more long term. It's not necessarily addressed for what is happening today. It's more for the long term, when the difference between manufacturing and services will be blurred. But mainly, it's about making the laws a bit easier, rules a bit easier, and benefits also to go through to the right companies.
Right. Okay, sir. So I think now we've reached the top of the hour, and I must say we've had a great exchange of ideas. I hope you all will leave this webinar with some clarity, some solutions, and most importantly, conversation starters. But before you go, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you all to another webinar, this time on the insolvency and bankruptcy code, which our law firm will be hosting tomorrow with Advocate Krishnendu Datta as the key speaker. You will find the details of the webinar available on our Facebook page, and we hope to see you all there tomorrow as well. It's flashing on your screens right now, actually. Um, Badri sir, it has been an honor to have had you here with us today, and help and the fact that you're here to guide us through this unprecedented economic situations. Your views have surely resonated with us and given us hope for the MSME sector. Before we part today, I'd like to express my gratitude to the entire team of Alliance Law Group and to all my colleagues for bringing this platform together and enabling this webinar. Like our Prime Minister said, we are moving towards an Atma Nirbhar, self-reliant India. I'd like to mention that this webinar has been solely put together by our self-reliant colleague, Advocate Pranoy Chatterjee. Thank you to all the participants for joining us and supporting us in our endeavor today. And we hope that you all are abiding by the social distancing norms released by the government. Stay safe and take care. And please let us know your feedback and suggestions on our Facebook page. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Badri. Thank you, Manya. It has been great experience for us, all of us. And I hope we can continue with an n number of webinars like that, provided
Like the one tomorrow.
obviously, no, IBC is coming up tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to work with Dr. Badri in furthermore ideas what we have got as a lawyers. And thank you, Dr. Badri.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yash Mishra. And I think lawyers and economists should discuss more, and we have a lot of things to learn from each other. I also learned a lot from you guys about the legal aspects, and I think we should collaborate more and more.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Manya.
Thank you.